Well, welcome. We are so glad that you could join us online for this Interfaith Power Light discussion of the Faithful Voter Reflection Guide. As we're getting ready to get started, we invite you to introduce yourself. Drop your name in the chat. Tell us where you're zooming in from. We welcome you, and I welcome you. I'm the Reverend Melanie Mullen. I am the Director of Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care for the Episcopal Church. But more importantly, I'm on the board of the Interfaith Power and Light. Glad to be a part of this community of people of faith and conscience who believe in our common good, and that preserving and saving our earth is the way that we help all of us to healing our land and our nation. So come on in. You are welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. And as we move forward, if you have questions, thoughts, or comments, go ahead and link into that Q&A button on your Zoom screen and ask your questions, and we will make sure that we address them as we go through our wonderful discussion today with our fabulous panelists, Marqus, the Organizing Director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, Muriel MacDonald, the Deputy Organizing Director of Dayenu, and Ahmet Tekelioglu, Executive Director of the Council on Islamic Relations in the Philadelphia chapter. And they will all join us in discussing this great tool and this important time for us as citizens and as a country and nation. And as we start this discussion, we want to make sure that we acknowledge that wherever you're zooming in from, that you help us in thinking about the truth and reconciliation of those who have led us thus far on the way. Be you here in our nation's capital, like I am, the lands of the Piscataway and Anacostan people, or wherever you are, reminding ourselves and each other that this land upon which we gather, where ancestors were living in harmony for thousands of years and leading us in an example of relationship with the land and with one another. To those and for all of those known and unknown, we acknowledge with respect and gratitude traditional keepers of this land. Grateful for this opportunity that IPL and our supporters can have this conversation today about this important time and work. And we also want to acknowledge that this is a critical time, that in the past week or so, we have seen how very important our nation is and all of the ways in which we uphold and participate in our common life and common good. That we as people of faith acknowledge wherever we come from. We are not a people that acknowledge fear or violence, but instead uphold the ability for people of faith to give a vision of wholeness, of reconciliation, and of healing, not just for all God's creatures, but all that God created. And so we hope that this time today of discussion helps us reignite that flame of passion, of hope, of justice, and of courage, that there is no time like the present to discuss, to challenge ourselves, and to commend ourselves to do this work. And so we mentioned we have these fabulous guests joining us in this IPL discussion, that all of us represent not only our own organizations, but Interfaith Power Light, a 501c3 nonpartisan organization where we do political engagement, but not for any particular candidate, public office, but in a way in which we all acknowledge that is the right and role of people of faith to hold community. Today's wonderful panelists that we've seen today, Marqus, Ahmet Tekelioglu, and you're going to correct the name pronunciation for me, and Muriel MacDonald, bring together to us their expertise and their love of creation and God's people. Marqus has been an organizing director for Interfaith Power Light in Georgia for years, leading climate change and advocacy work all across the metro area. He was named a GRIST 50 Fixers, a Political Voices Fellows, and an op-ed project partner for the Yale Program on Climate Change. Marqus brings so much with us, and with him, including his JD, Juris Doctorate from DePaul, Bachelor of Art from Georgia State, and lots of faith and courage doing this work. And Muriel, Organizing Director for Dayenu, a Jewish call for climate action. She's an organizer, a trainer, a communicator based in San Francisco, but is also helping people craft their voice, develop curriculums, training one another, as they build work towards multi-generational Jewish movements that confront climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. I love that. Muriel has so much experience fighting fossil fuel projects, working with hundreds across the country, and she was executive director of the Sunrise Movement in the Bay Area. We love to hear from Muriel. And Ahmet, executive director for the Council on American-Islamic Relations in the Philadelphia chapter, brings with him years of experience with the CAIR. He's publicly served as outreach director in the Northeast and helps bring the idea of civic engagement to all ages with school district projects, serving on boards of nonprofits and helping bring all of those in his metro area together, thinking about the American Muslim history and identity in connection with climate change and saving this earth. He's got a PhD from Boston University and brings with him studies at George Mason, where he's a research fellow at the Center for Global Islamic Studies. We're glad to have you, Ahmet. And we're glad to have all of you joining us. As like I said, we are about to engage in this critical work at a critical time in one of the most important elections, probably from our adult lives, as we look at issues changing on our feet, but ways in which we are calling ourselves into community. And so just a reminder, if you have questions, comments, or ideas, go ahead and use that Q&A box to keep adding to the chat, and we could be a part of this conversation. This whole conversation is focused very pointedly on the Interfaith Power Light's Faithful Voter Engagement Guide, which was just released this past week, but continues a long tradition of helping people of faith ask the really important questions about climate, about community, and about justice, and how we are called to engage in this work. So now I want to ask some of our guests about their reflection on what it means to be people of faith who vote. Marqus, for instance, what does it mean for you, and why is it important for you to be sharing in this important work as a faithful voter caring about the environment?
Yeah, I love that question. And not just as a faithful voter, but a faithful voter in the state of Georgia. So if you paid any attention to any of our election stuff over the past couple of years, you know that I have the pleasure, benefit, maybe responsibility of being a voter of faith in a crucial area and a crucial time right now. And what really comes to mind for me, Melanie, and what I want to share with folks here today is one of the things that as people of faith we've known for a really long time, and social science is just now starting to catch up with, is that you don't just change people's minds, right? We're not going to argue somebody into brute force kind of acceptance, but there's really this idea of changing hearts. And in our faith traditions, at least in the faith tradition that I follow as a follower of Jesus, we've heard this for a long time from the prophets, right? Whether it was the prophet Moses in Deuteronomy 30, sharing with the people of God about the circumcision of the heart that would allow them to, not only love him with all their heart, but also with all their soul and to live. Whether it was the psalmist writing, praying in Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit, or even the prophet Ezekiel saying to the people of God about God, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. And the reason I start with scripture first is because social science is catching up with us, Melanie. When we talk about mindset work and we talk about strategic comms or narrative change, what we're talking about is inviting people into a new story that's based on their values and their experience, and then voting from that place. So the organizing work I get to do here in Georgia is all about calling people of faith back to values, justice, mercy, solidarity, and then voting from those values.
I love that. Thank you so much for reminding us. This isn't new. We're being called back to the values we know, back to a change of our hearts. And that makes me wonder a little bit more about, well, what is at stake in this election? And maybe Muriel can help us reflect on that. As we're being called back as faith, why vote now and in this election?
Yeah, sure thing, Melanie. So, at Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, we have a vision that I think most of us on this call, if not all of us on this call, probably share, which is for a just, livable, and sustainable world for all people for generations to come. And the climate crisis, as we know, poses a threat to this vision, to life on Earth as we know it. And it also worsens historic inequalities like racism and wealth disparities. And we have right now a very narrow critical window to do something about it. And as the climate crisis accelerates, time is growing very short to make the big systemic changes that we need to avert these worst case scenarios. The passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant climate bill in the history of the United States, was an important but imperfect start, and it's not enough. And so the voter guide that you introduced so beautifully, I think, frames this up really clearly. It says we still have time to avert its worst impacts if we act now to reduce climate pollution, transition to clean energy, eliminate fossil fuels, and address transportation and food systems, and help communities prepare for the more powerful storms that are now coming. And November's election is going to determine whether we have a fighting chance to make these changes.
Muriel, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of hope. There is time if we act now, and that we have a vision that we can do something about. And so there is hope, there is opportunity. And therefore, I want to ask Ahmet, now, what do we do? What do we do with this challenge right now as people of faith and using the tools that we've got, especially those in this guide?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And thank you for this space, for this discussion, and to all the colleagues. I want to give also a shout out to IPL, our colleagues in Pennsylvania doing the work with Interfaith Power and Light. I think, like, the way that I've just, like, as Muriel said, the utility of the guide for me is, we also run a 501c3 sort of voter turnout program, and oftentimes people tell us, you're telling us to go out and vote, you're registering us to vote, but who do we vote for? What do we do? And of course, we're in a position to not say, vote for this person, not vote for this person, but that, we try to guide them through their values and ask them to approach politics from a position of their own power and their own self-interest from an organizing perspective. And the guide is really doing that job beautifully in a very concise manner. I also have to congratulate everyone who has given their thought to it, in giving guidance to communities on questions to think about, on issues that are important for our communities, on what's at stake at this election, and to think from an intersectional point, point of view. Not only there is references to different scriptures, but also there are different issues that are raised that intersect with the environment, with justice, with broader issues that impact our communities. So what do we do is I think every voter who thinks critically and carefully about their vote and the value of their vote should engage with this guide, should think through the questions that are being highlighted, as well as on issues that are being lifted up in the guide. For me, it has been very helpful because, as always, there are different priorities, and there are different ways that our communities are given, including voting for bad, between two bad choices sometimes, and it can help them shift the narrative in elections on I have to vote for people to I can engage with elected officials through these questions, through these issues, through my values that are reflected in the guide. So I think one of the key issues, and I would encourage my community as well, is maybe even focus one area, choose that, and then brainstorm together on, okay, so who in our area fits into the bill, how can we scorecard perhaps based on this guide, the elected officials in our area, and of course also think down ballot as well. I'm also always encouraging our folks to think about, hey, in your school board members too, you can ask them on how they're going to make your schools and your school district more environmentally conscious. You can engage that in your city council. You don't necessarily just think about the presidential level. So trickle down, I think, to summarize: one, engage with the guide and use the guide as that, moral voice. Two, I think, the ways that it is bringing different issues together is so powerful. And three, think about elections from our communal interests and for engage in ballot as well, and not merely think about like top of the ticket.
Ahmet, you are speaking to my little Episcopalian heart when you think about thinking critically and carefully about what we value in this world as a place to start. And I love how empowering that is, that we are organized people and we're organizing some of our powers and asking those questions. And you did bring up that the guide, which might surprise people, is about lots of issues and how they are all related. So thinking that it's a bigger set of issues and a bigger set of places to pay attention to as we begin to think critically and carefully. How does that translate into this particular 2024 election? Is there anything unique about this? And I see Muriel nodding. I think you know. What are we thinking about for this November 2024?
Yeah, well, I think we've all felt it. I don't even really, have to tell you. It's incredibly high stakes, uncertain, and for many of us, very painful time to be living through. This summer brought devastating heat all over the globe and climate disasters, horrific violence at home and abroad. Many of us, if not personally affected, witnessed it in high resolution through social media. And with the election, we're facing very serious threats to decades of climate progress that we fought very hard to achieve and to our democracy. So that's the doom and gloom part. In Judaism, we have this phrase, Lador Vador, which means from generation to generation. And that is what is at stake, right? Not only generations now who are suffering and praying and organizing for their lives, but for all future generations, and whether those future generations will inherit a just and livable future. We know that particularly in this election, fossil fuel corporations and other special interests are investing millions of dollars. And voter suppression is a key tactic that they're investing in to prevent voters from making their voices heard at the ballot box, and from making sure those concerns that they have around the climate disasters they've experienced and more are expressed. But we have people power, and people power does win. And this fall, that will look like millions and millions and millions of voters with this shared vision of a just, livable future making their way to the polls.
I'm writing that down. I might be preaching on it, a just, livable future. And once again, reminding us that, from generation to generation, we are not all gloom and doom. We've fought hard, we've worked hard, people of faith, and there's still work to go. And so I love that, drawing that arc that bends towards justice. It is very long indeed, but we have been making progress, and there's more for us to keep going on this year. But that reminds me of how one of my favorite words, how intersectional this is as well. From generation to generation, the way we have a just, sustainable world might look a little different. And so what's your takeaway, Marqus, especially when you think about this guy and all of those sort of moral issues it brings up: climate change, racial justice, economic justice. Do they all make sense? Do they all play together as people of faith, or should we just stick to our lane, perhaps? How do you encourage people to live into that?
I love that, stick to the lane. And I think Muriel and Ahmet both gave us two great launching pads, right? Whether it's the generation to generation or the shifting the narrative. And in the work that I get to do, so often I'm reminded that when we're talking about shifting the narrative, for a lot of folks, they're not even aware of the narrative that they're living into and speaking into, right? And so here in America, we oftentimes talk about the American dream, which really is a narrative that's rags to riches. And when I speak to people of faith and remind them of scripture, Paul, who is the apostle, he's Jewish, knows the Torah better than I ever will. In Philippians 2, when he talks about the story of God, he talks about it through the lens of riches to rags, back to richness. And the way he uses it is, speaking of the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, he talks about Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, and it goes on longer. And the reason, I want to go back to this narrative is that so many American people of faith, especially Christians, have bought into this individualism, deservingness, scarcity narrative, right? And we have these faith values that speak to the solidarity that Muriel talked about, righteousness and justice that Ahmet talked about, and this idea of abundance, right? This abundance that we as the created beings can honor and glorify a creator God who sustains the entire cosmos. So if you start from that story, then climate justice is being in right relationship with the creator God and the rest of creation. When we talk about racial justice, it's how do we see those in need, those in crisis, and love our neighbors as ourselves? You know, that's a deep tradition in our faith background. In the dignity of all people, seeing them as image bearers of the creator God, and maybe even going a step beyond that of the beloved of God, that God so loved the world. You know, again, in the Christian tradition, we know that scripture. And so when we talk about this voter guide, I really try to encourage folks that I speak to not see this as a secular voter guide that tells you how to vote. It really is a guide to help us understand our values and why we vote, why we're called to act in this way right now. And that's a story that's tied deeply and intimately to scripture and to people of faith's moral values.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head of why do we vote? Not just people who are citizens, but religious people, people of faith. And you mentioned from our shared tradition, this great scripture writer and Apostle Paul, who people might have a love-hate relationship with. But my memory is that all those letters started about people in faith communities in relationship with the common good, with the civitas, with the communitas. And so, I mean, it's a relationship we still have to work our way into, don't we? But I think we're doing something brave, as you pointed out, Marqus. Like, if we as faith people call each other into this public democracy place, there's still work to be done. And so I wonder, how else can we help each other think about democracy as a faith issue and voting as central to our faith? Are there anything that stands out, Ahmet, perhaps from your faith tradition that sort of invites us into doing this work of faith and politics, perhaps?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I was like, listening to my colleagues and their wonderful reflections, I was also thinking about this verse from the Quran that talks about the servants of the most compassionate are those who walk on the earth with humility. And then addresses the believers to respond to those, who are speaking from a point of ignorance with peace. And especially at this time, like in our communities, like, emotions are high, like, with what's going on in Gaza and like in the Netanyahu visit and as such. But what we are seeing, and I think like that's why the guide was so helpful for me, is like that it brings out that aspect of humility, that aspect of like inviting us to approach, every one of these issues from a point of faith. Like, our democracy is fragile. We are seeing that we need to act on this, but we need to, from a point of humility, because it's encouraging the reader to think about all these different issues that impact us, from immigration to other issues, right? And to think about, those who are continuously historically marginalized. Think from a restorative, like, lens, right? All of these are points that are encouraging us to think from that point of humility. And I think the other thing is the readers, and hopefully our communities will engage with the guide, will realize is that it's making a good argument about connecting, like, our care for this earth, for the creation of God, right? So like, both, like, all aspects of it, from a point of like, thinking about at the same time dangers that face our communities, our voting rights, right? So like, this year we have run a number of workshops with our communities, especially encouraging them to think about voting rights as a hard-earned right. Right, so it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily put all of your trust in electoral politics. There are other ways to affect change, yes, but at the same time, your voting rights is important. It's hard earned. It's built on like the shoulders of giants of our communities, and so many tears and so many pain as well, so much pain as well. That it has been like the historical sort of like trend to marginalize our communities in the ballot box is still ongoing, and it's still something that we need to be careful about. So especially this year, right? So whichever way, like, one, like, inclines, politically and as such, I think it's going to be critically important for our communities to still continue to turn out. Maybe some people will again, like, go uncommitted, or like will do like, write-ins. Maybe they are not going to vote for certain offices, but they're going to vote for others. But that it is important for us to continue to put that moral voice in the ballot box. It's not a space that we can sort of like, we can leave empty. And I think, like, this year in one of the areas in Philadelphia area, when I was door knocking, one of the families was an Egyptian mother and her daughter. They opened the door, and I was trying to convince them to get out and vote, and they were trying to get from me, "You're saying this, but people are not representing our interests. They're not even listening to us. They don't even come door knock with us. Why do we even go out and vote?" It was the right question. I think like they were asking the right kinds of questions, and they were coming to it from a critical point of view, and they wanted a guidance from me on who to vote for. And of course I couldn't say, but that we had a good conversation, and that they were committed to putting their anger in the ballot box as well. And I think this is the kind of engagement that we need, and the guide really helps connect all these issues in a beautiful way. I was so sort of also impressed with like the different scriptures that are being referenced, and the perspectives that they bring from different perspectives. So I think this year, especially, we're going to see more efforts towards voter intimidation. We're going to see more efforts towards voter marginalization. We're going to see efforts towards like voter suppression. And I think the issues that are highlighted here are all together collectively make a good case for us to overcome all of these things that target our communities.
I love that so much, that reminder that we, as people of faith, get to put that moral voice in the ballot box. I mean, it's a beautiful image that for those who felt, as you mentioned, marginalized in so many ways historically and currently in this country, that voice is especially needed. And I mean, what a challenge, what a call. If there's no better way to say that we have got to do this work. And I'm wondering also, think about Muriel, you've worked with people across generations, right? Or it's focusing on younger voters and older voters. Are there folks who traditionally might need an extra bit of encouragement to start putting their moral voice in the ballot box? Or do you see any resources or tools or hope in this guide and this work to help those who might be a little reticent to do that?
Absolutely. So I kind of have two answers to this question, Melanie. And one is, this is exactly what we're focused on with Dayenu's Get Out the Vote work this year. We call it Chutzpah 2024. Chutzpah is a Yiddish word for guts or boldness. And we're calling voters who are concerned about the climate crisis in states impacted by the climate crisis, but who are not regular voters. And as a reminder to everyone, we don't know who people vote for, but whether or not you vote is public record. And we partner with the Environmental Voter Project, which is a great organization that has experience IDing these voters and building these lists. And we call these voters and we just give them information, factual, fact-checked information about when, where, and what they'll need to vote and vote safely. There are so many reasons that folks don't vote, and so many of those reasons are connected, as Ahmet said, to voter suppression. And so giving folks the info they need to make it to the polls and overcome suppression is statistically more effective than shaming people for not voting. Shaming is not the coolest or most effective tactic, and particularly with the voters that we're calling through the Environmental Voter Project. And then the other thing you can do, which is almost the opposite answer, is have those deep conversations like Ahmet described for us, where you truly take turns listening and then sharing from your own heart. And this is something we can do with people that we know, or you can do it when you're door knocking. And sometimes you might hear the phrase deep canvassing thrown around. This is what I'm talking about. So if you're thinking of folks in your community specifically who don't usually vote, you are probably the person who is best positioned to talk to them from a place rooted in shared values. way more effective to hear from someone you know than a stranger. And you can, go to those questions in the guide. The voter guide does a great job of framing up these value-based conversations around the election. What do you want the future to hold? What do you believe? And then take time for yourself to share what are your personal experiences that have moved you to care about voting and believing in the future. Those stories will also stick with people and move people without feeling like you're telling them what to do.
I love that. It's worth repeating. Shaming doesn't quite work. People want to talk to people they have a relationship with. And I even heard a little bit of organizing theory in you. We have to understand what we believe in, what's motivating us first to have those big, deep conversations. I love all of that. Maybe Ahmet or Marqus, either of you, is there any other bit of the discussion questions in the guide that really sparked your interest or seem like, oh, these are things that we should hone in for your congregation or your prayer group, or what else is in that discussion guide that is particularly inspiring, that helps do this work?
So I'll just say briefly and then let my friend Ahmet go. I love both, not only the questions for reflection, but the questions for candidates, because it moves the conversation from, what you might say, navel gazing or just thinking about thinking, to actually moving it to policymakers and saying, my vote is valuable. My vote empowers you to make policies that affect my neighbors and I. What do you think about this issue that is important to me? And I think that is such a critical step that moves us beyond kind of, being in arguments with our uncle or aunt at the dinner table or online on social media, into actual change. And I think that just really is always inspiring when I see that.
Yeah, thank you, Marqus. And just to add, and that was beautiful. I think especially the reflection questions, the way that they encourage one to think about their own faith tradition, their own moral values, the universal values that they believe in, and the earth and our stewardship of the earth, and how that then connects to us taking care of our neighbors, us taking care of one another. I think that is really powerful for me. And again, I'm so struck by they are not sort of questions for the sake of including some questions in the guide. I was really, while reading again, kudos to everyone who has worked on it, and I'm sure everybody has given a lot of thought and a lot of time to it. There are questions that really would help you regardless. One particular set also about water suppression and as such, right? So is asking us to think about at the state and the local level, how can we sort of think about water protection at the state and the local level, and think about our fellow sort of Americans in ways that also would come from a restorative perspective, how our tax dollars are being used. What are the economic inequalities that impact our communities, right? So because, there are some stereotypes about all of our communities that we are representing one way or another here. And the guide, I think, does a very good job of going past those stereotypes and asking people to relate to one another as human beings. And I think that is really powerful. I know that, for those of us in the Muslim landscape who are, especially, there are many organizations now focused on an environmental justice, being sort of environmentally conscious. I think many of these organizations, but also many who may not have had as much intersection with with these issues, will benefit from the questions. Again, I would even encourage that smaller groups of folks could take aspects of this guide, focus on those, maybe do in a weekly discussion, in a session, and that could really lead to a lot of food for thought and a lot of action and ways to organize. It could be even a very good also organizing tool for people who are trying to understand what are the issues that impact communities that they work with. We at Care Philadelphia will try to utilize the tool, the guide, in ways to talk to our youth and our young community members to see how we can both bring out what's on there, rather what impacts them, but at the same time to talk with them and then to work with them to organize them towards being more active in the field.
I love that. That is so thoughtful, and so much to learn from that. And if anything, I hear there is a method to this madness, that these are not just questions, Marqus, you called it navel gazing, but creating community, almost as we are engaging the larger body politic with this work. That's so helpful. And that you gave us like a picture of different ways you could use this with your congregation, with your neighbors, as you work on these issues going forward. There was a little bit of a question I can see in the chat. You also mentioned earlier turning some of those questions to the public, to candidates, to those who are promoting resolutions or bills or things in state law. Any thoughts about how you make that shift to using them for your own sense of peace, but also as a tool sort of engaging or evaluating outbound? Because it sounds like you've already done that a little bit, Ahmet.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a good point. And I think really probably for all of us, I mean, beyond reading and saying, oh, these are good questions, I will try to just sit down and actually write responses to them, because during that process, I'm sure there'll be new ideas, and maybe even some points that I will find that I need to educate myself a little bit more. I need to find a little bit more on where candidates stand on these again. And there will be another level of work, and perhaps for those of us who might either be working with brilliant interns and as such, is we can guide them towards, hey, here are some questions. Can you try to find something, dig some information on these candidates in a website, so that we can include it in our scorecards, for example, for candidates. Yes, we may not be able to endorse one or reject folks, but we can at least guide our communities to say that, hey, in your area there's an oil refinery, and then this candidate hasn't said anything about it, and then this other person has said about the potential impact of it. But I think for me, to your insightful question, is really probably going to be that additional level of homework for all of us to do, and then to also not shy away from saying, hey, our morality, our care for one another requires for us, when we engage with politicians, to also bring these issues up, including maybe there are some other issues that we're talking to them about, so that they can understand that the communities that they are engaging with care about these issues and are asking those questions. If their platform doesn't include anything, maybe that's something that we lift for them, and then say, hey, here are some questions that's Interfaith Power and Light has put out. Can you please give us some answers to what your platform says about it, right? So things like that could really be ways to push them as well as ourselves.
Yeah, so the good news and the more good news is that I love this. This is homework, but this is an invitation as well. I'm curious. I mean, Marqus, you represent Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, a regional incarnation of this work. Is that similar to how you will be using the tool in Georgia, or are there other adjustments or tweaks that you'll be inviting folks into doing?
Yeah, I love that word, incarnation. There's a lot there to be unpacked. I'm going to avoid. And what I would say is, really, when we think through the voter guide, really what we're thinking through here at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light is, how do we use this as a tool, right? How do we use this not as an in of itself, right? This is not the goal of the voter guide. The voter guide is a tool to start conversations. And so there, and again, I'm here in Georgia, it's in the name. But we don't take for granted that for a lot of folks of faith here in Georgia, the threshold question is not who to vote for, but it is, should I vote, right? Should I be voting? And sometimes that's a good faith question that people are asking. What's my role as a person of faith? How do I engage with the civic world? And sometimes it's not a good faith question, But what the voter guide allows us to do as a tool is say, look, here are folks of faith from different faith traditions all over the country that are wrestling with the same question you are on some of the biggest issues of our day right now. And here are some questions you can be asking yourself in your journaling time or in your small group time, or asking policymakers about these issues. So one of the best ways that we're able to use this guide, at least here in Georgia, is just not only a discussion starter, but a validator that it's a discussion we should be having. And then once we get past that threshold question, yeah, we can look at the different issues and talk about different ways of thinking about any particular issue. But here in Georgia, at least for quite a bit of folks, the threshold question isn't who should I vote for, it's should I be voting? And the voter guide, I think, really, really in a faithful way addresses that question.
Thank you. I mean, it bears repeating again and again. There are folks for whom the issue is, should you vote? And how do we help in conversation people get to the yes? Then that's one of our callings. I'm curious about Dayenu. Muriel, you've already mentioned that you're pulling from a lot of different faithful voter resources. What's the call to action that you all are generating from this guide, and then in conversation with some of those other wonderful faith-based creation and environmental resources?
Yeah, so our call to action right now, to our base, to anyone on this call who wants to come organize with us, you are so welcome, is to actually get our communities to come hit the phones with us. We're not only asking people to go vote, but to go one step further and do some phone banking. Phone banking isn't everybody's cup of tea, but we make it fun. We have music. We ground ourselves every shift with faith and with Jewish words of intention, which we call a kavanah, and really tried to make sure that we're also doing that thing you mentioned, building community, as we do this work. So yes, our call to action right now is to consider co-sponsoring or hosting a phone bank with us. And if you want to learn more, you can go to our website, dayenu.org/chutzpah. 2 Jewish words, so I will put it in the chat. You just check it out and consider joining us. Yeah.
I love it. You mentioned FUN fun in the midst of this. And this is just a start, engaging these questions, committing, having a plan to vote, helping people articulate why they're voting is the first step. And then there's more that people can be engaged in with, like, joy. I can see it in your invitation and delight. And it's not just homework as a slog, but the work of the people, some folks call liturgy or public commitment. That's so exciting. And there's so many places in which you all have shown us that these questions, or even thinking about it, helps us understand where we're going to fit in this call to action. And that it's work for all of us to do. I'm so in awe of that. There were some more folks thinking in general about the usefulness of this guide, how they might use it at home. And we'll hear a theme here. What kind of conversations are next for people of faith and good conscience to have to renew this democracy? That is the big question. But does looking at this guide, thinking about this work in this call, lead you to sort of help emphasize, I love that, the kapanah, the big faithful questions for us to do this work? For any of you, what is the next step in our conversation to renew democracy?
Yeah, I'll tackle this one because Muriel said something that's really important that we're trying to instill here at GIPL this season, which is not just, yes, vote, please go vote, but also get involved civically, right? And so we're going to be doing some door knocking, we're going to do some text banking. And our philosophy there, just to kind of answer your question, is don't just do it because we asked you to do it or do it alongside us. We want you to participate, yes, but we want you to practice with the tools, the text banking tools, the phone banking tools, because for us, at least the vision is that these communities of faith will then go pioneer that into their own communities. communities. And what do I mean by that? I don't want you just to be involved in 2024 because it's a big presidential election. I want when the local county commissioner or the school board is doing something for our folks to have the tools, the capacity inside of their own mosque, inside of their own congregations to organize and to do this work. And so for us, the philosophy here with 2024 and this voter guide is, here's a big moment where lots of people are paying attention. So let's get folks trained up. Let's start to build that movement. But for us, the momentum coming out of November is as important, if not more important, than what we do over these next couple of months leading up to November.
Great reminder. It doesn't end in November. Absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic. Any final thoughts as you all are thinking about getting not just to November, but through November with this very important work?
Something I say often to my friends is that, this is just a tactic, right? In a much larger struggle for that just livable future that we all want to share. And I think that's important to remember when we're doing this work. It's not the end game, it's a tactic. And I think that's also helpful to remember when we're having conversations with folks who are not so sure that this is gonna speak for them, their vote. Someone I want to credit who said it, but I don't remember exactly who said it's not a love letter, it's a chess move. And so we're just helping folks engage in this tactic for something that goes way past this election cycle, that is much bigger than the political parties at the top of the ticket. And it's really more about building power for our communities and for future generations.
All right, we got to read, mark, and digest that one. It is not a love letter. It's a chess move, or these are all tools, or these are all resources. And these acts are places in which we are taking another step. Or if you have a tradition like mine that says sometimes we want to pray with our hands and feet on the earth, protesting and writing letters. We might be praying also by having voter guide discussions or taking our values to the ballot box. Thank you so much for putting it in that bigger realm, that this is a part of the work that goes beyond and with joy and love. Yeah. Any other reminders or calls to action that you are generating from this guide for people of faith in your area?
Yeah, I think we are as we get ready to sort of fully ramp up in Pennsylvania, and where we are also facing a difficult time, and in our own communities there's a lot of an apathy and a lot of loss of trust with politicians. I think what we are trying to encourage folks to do is to continue to put their organizing hats on, to think about their own interests, to think about long term, putting their own values and people who can be accountable to them into offices, and to work towards that, and to be civically engaged, as Marqus so beautifully put, at multiple levels. And from a faith perspective, right? So then we're also reminding people of their responsibility to enjoin the good, to discourage the bad, and to approach politics from that perspective. And I think the guide is a very helpful tool in that. We will be using it very actively, and especially with our also canvassing team. Last cycle, in the primaries, we've knocked over 15,000 doors. This cycle, we are trying to increase that even more, and we are going to remind this as an important tool for our communities, and at the same time, make sure that folks can think about politics and their own local issues in connection to those that they may not be immediately in touch with. And I think the guide is really doing that work beautifully, and especially also think about our responsibilities towards this earth, towards climate, and towards one another in a critical way, as we sort of think and engage with elected officials and those seeking office. But more importantly, I think like, building power for our communities, making sure that, our communities can put that like, communal voice first, so that, our organizing and our like votes are not for just select between like, whatever is in front of you, but rather long term, we can affect change and we can put people of conscience, hopefully, in these offices, people who at least will be accountable to the communities that they seek to represent.
Amen. And thank you. This reminder again that this is not just a moment, it's a movement that goes from generation to generation on the long arc of justice, and that we are building communal voice. We are practicing ways that change this narrative into a place where people remind and remember that this is a community for all of us. The least of these, the marginalized, and all of those who are building our communal power. And just to let you all know as panelists that as you give us visions of hope, share these conversations, folks have been making commitments, or at least sharing ideas of how they're going to do this work and share this guide, be it on social media, in small groups, maybe printing them out, maybe passing them out at services and talking about it. Maybe folks have do a little thinking with their congregation in the next coming weeks, but are going to share and do this work. And so we are so excited that you will join all of us as people of faith and people across the nation doing the homework of changing this narrative, lifting our voices, and making sure everyone's voice is heard for the healing of this planet. There are so many other resources and ways to use this work. And not only is there a guide, but make sure that you check out the webpage associated with the guide with resources to go further, to use it and to adapt it to your community. We need your help, as Mike is saying from IPL, to share this with your network. Somebody out there needs to hear this sermon, that we are people of faith, we care, we are asking and demanding that our leaders listen to the voices of the least and all of us when it comes to caring for our world and our world. So please stay in touch and stay in tune with this work. Any final thoughts or words as we send folks out to do this joyful homework and to make our mark as people of faith for generations to come?
Yeah, I would just offer, as we talk about hope, that the flip side of it, the grief, the eco grief, especially that young folks feel, and that's real. And what I always try to talk to people of faith about is simply this, that in our scripture traditions, at least to the folks that I speak to a lot here in Georgia, we have something to do with that grief. We call it lament, taking our grief before God. And then we have one more step after lament, which is repenting, which is turning, shuving, and going in a different direction. So I just always want to let people know, yes, grief is real, but as people of faith, we know what to do with that grief, lament, and then we can act in a different way. And so I would just tell people and leave people with that idea: take your grief, turn it into lament, and then turn and go in a different direction.
Amen. Thank you, Marqus. We can help people learn to turn it around. Ahmet or Muriel, any final thoughts?
In Judaism, this same idea is called teshuvah, and our season of turning is in the fall, in the month leading up to the election. So right on time, right on schedule with that theme. Thank you.
No, same. And appreciates you all and everything that has been said.
Thank you all for reminding us that we are all branches from this one holy tree, the God has provided some people of faith who are here to help turn it around, to give us hope, and to remind people not to just get to November, but through it as we build this work in community. Please stay in touch and stay in tune with Interfaith Power Light, a 501c3 organization. We are nonpartisan, but we are also about building the work of people of faith to have and hold public conversations to save our environment. As we conclude our time together, we want to thank our panelists and thank all of you for joining us, for committing with us, for signing up to do the homework, to get this word out to your networks, to your congregations, and all of those who might need to hear this word, that we can make a change and do this work in 2024, November and beyond. Many blessings on you all with hope and faith. stay tuned and tune in to the resources at IPL online. There's lots of resources in the chat and on the website because there's more work to do, more skills to do it, and more hands to share the journey. Thank you so much for all the blessings, and make sure you go out and remind people not just what are you going to vote for, but are you going to vote on election day? Your faith matters, and we hope to see you help us make a change this November. Be well, and thanks on behalf of Interfaith Power and Light.